everyone, Rhiannon Samuel here with Viante, New Mexico, giving you an update on the 2020 special legislative session that was intended to help the state's budget. I'm going to do my best to keep this video short, but if anybody's watched any of my other videos, you know I can get a little long-winded, but I'm hopeful that the information I provide is helpful to you. I'm going to talk about the budget, what the large numbers are around it, and then other bills that were introduced during the session and will be going to the governor's desk. The Senate met for 3 days to handle all of this work, and the House met for 5. First and foremost on their plate is that budget. It was initially crafted at the beginning of the year for $7.6 billion, and what happened with COVID-19 and with the decline in oil and gas is that New Mexico was facing a $2 billion deficit. So the legislators went to work in crafting a new one to plug up that hole. The new budget looks like $7 billion. So they cut $600 million from that initial budget. You might be asking yourself, if it was a $2 billion deficit, why is it now just less than $2 billion that they cut? So here's what they did. First, they are looking at collecting $750 million from federal funds intended to help states with coronavirus recovery and aiding their departments and the running of state government to plug up that hole. Second, they cut a lot of infrastructure projects that had not started already, and that was things that had capital outlay that was allocated but just was sitting there as they were waiting for contractors. Third, they did cut some department spending by $600 million. What that looks like is less of a raise for teachers. Infrastructure projects that were within the departments were cut as well. And so we are now left with a $7 billion budget for 2021. Legislators were pleased with what had been done because it was quite a bit of work. However, there was certainly an air of caution, understanding that employment, pre-COVID employment, will not reach those levels for another 5 years. That's what the state economists are saying. Second, the oil and gas prices are rebounding, but not to pre-COVID levels. So something that the state relies so heavily on, that is also lagging a little bit. And then consumer spending and gross receipts tax, or as I'll call it in this video, GRT, that's not expected to rebound anytime soon either. Forecasts now say that when they go into the 2021 session to handle the 2022 budget, they are looking at having a $1.4 billion deficit and having to make that up. And that's concerning for all those reasons I outlined before and the lack of revenue that the state's going to have to handle it, but also because even in this retooled budget, the reoccurring spending over last year is over 1%. And so there was still an increase of spending that they are going to have to make good on, or perhaps cut programs that were just greenlit, and lots of infrastructure projects, including our roadways, that were cut and perhaps won't get funded because they're going to have to grapple with that large budget deficit again. So legislators are, I think, mentally preparing for a tough session, and that's even pending if they make it through their election cycle. 15 of the legislators who were in the special session will not be there in 2021, either because they chose not to run again or they were ousted in their primaries. So we'll have a new composition in 2021. We will have people who may not have any government experience or may have a lot, depending on how the races shake out. Certainly something to keep your eye on, because the entire country, the entire world is facing a really incredible economic recovery plan, and we in New Mexico need to understand who is there at the helm with all of that. So that's the budget. What else did they work on? So House Bill 5 was creating a civil rights commission that will look at constitutional rights in New Mexico and provide recommendations. That's heading to the governor's desk. House Bill 6, this is waiving tax penalties for business owners that were incurred during the pandemic. So the GRT and the property tax that they are asked to remit to the government, if they were unable to because their doors were closed, they may not have had the revenue, they incurred penalties. This bill would waive those penalties. However, the small businesses still need to pay those taxes. They just don't have to pay above and beyond that now. Senate Bill 3, this is a low interest loan program from the New Mexico Severance Tax Permanent Fund. And this would be for small businesses and local governments, again, to help with the COVID-19 recovery and getting our economy back on track. Looking at Senate Bill 4, this was temporary changes for the 2020 general election. The primary purpose of this bill was to grapple with the ongoing pandemic and understanding that it will still be a challenge in November. The intent from the onset was to allow for all mail-in voting, but there is some concern around that. Whether it be the lack of access to get your ballot back to your county clerk, the Secretary of State, because you live in a rural part of New Mexico. There's concerns that were raised around voter fraud, although that has not seen borne out across the country. So what ended up happening is the county clerks and the Secretary of State will be able to mail out to all registered voters an application for an absentee ballot. So it's not exactly an automatic, here's your ballot, fill it out, send it back. Once you get what the county clerks will send you, you have to fill that out. They will send you your ballot after that, after you have filled out that initial form, then you can send it back. It seems as though too that we will still have the minimum required polling locations, specifically in Native American country, so that way it doesn't infringe on rights to vote. So that's the major thrust of this bill, but it was amended to allow for independents to participate in the primaries. And of course, we already went through the primaries for 2020, but this would be for years going forward. And the law was set around it being a step towards allowing for more open primaries. My reading of it is, if you're an independent, you get to go on election day or even before and re-register as a Republican, Democrat, or Libertarian and be able to participate in those primaries. It wasn't clear to me if it would revert back following that election, or you would have to go back in and say you're an independent, but quite frankly, I'm an independent, and that was something that I could already do. So this is lauded as a step towards open primaries, and perhaps it is now that it's in law, but it's not anything groundbreaking or new. So keep an eye out for that years to come. And if you're an independent like me, this could impact you. So next was Senate Bill 5. This was tethered to the budget, and it was canceling $141 million of capital outlay projects, including road projects, and these were things that were deemed as stalled and didn't actually come to fruition, and so they clawed back that money. And then finally, there was Senate Bill 8 requiring law enforcement officers to wear cameras. This was one of the last bills that the House worked on, and it was filled with controversy and some contention because the special legislative session was not open to the public. And so there was opportunity for the public to call in or write public comment if they like something or not. But what would normally happen is somebody could stand up in committee and state their claim and if they like something or not. And so many Republicans voiced concerns that our law enforcement officers did not get to do that in this bill. There was also concerns around the Freedom of Information Act, and in acquiring this video, do you protect victims' rights? Do you blur them out? Do you not? And so it was passed, and it's going to the governor's desk, but it still has some things that lawmakers say that they'll just go back and work on in 2021 to work out the details. So that was 7 bills that are going to the governor's desk. It was a very busy special session, and in summation, it was chaotic. For me, trying to watch it here from my office, it was a little tough because I would see that the House would start at a certain time, and then it would be like 2 hours later because they had other meetings going on, and I wasn't privy to the that information, so I'm just kind of waiting for things to start. Also, it was a lot of technical issues. It was an unprecedented time. I'm not slighting anyone for it, but the web feed wasn't always working, and I know that was a point of frustration for many legislators and the leadership because they worked really hard to ensure that there would be as little hiccups as possible, and just not being able to see things beforehand. And it's just an unprecedented time. People who were even in the roundhouse had a tough time keeping up with all the things that were happening. And I think by and large, with all of those challenges that were in the way, they did the best that they could. We now have a budget that will get us through this year, but our eyes are set on 2021. There's going to have to be some serious conversations about what continues and what doesn't, and how our state is going to move forward as we try and recover from this unprecedented pandemic. So through it all, you can count on Viante. We're going to keep our eye on it. We're going to watch whatever form we're able to even see it in 2021. But between now and then, we have elections. We're going to talk about those. So stay tuned. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions. I may not know the answer, but I will certainly find a way to figure it out. So thanks, and see you next time.